I never expected my parents to turn against me over my relationship. My mother's voice shook. Choose us or lose everything. And Jamie, that's how the ultimatum lands. Over roasted lamb, under a chandelier that hums like a beehive. I'm Alex, 29, a cardiac nurse who lives by alarms and instincts. I rent a small flat that smells faintly of eucalyptus cleaner and burnt toast, and I keep my promises the way I keep a patient breathing. Steady, practical, no flair. Jamie and I met after a code blue when the lift jammed with a trolley inside. He opened a panel, traced a wire, and freed us with a grin. He's an electrician with a battered van and calm hands that remember every screw size like birthdays. He brings tea, not flowers. He listens. We kept things quiet while we found our footing, then told my parents once it felt real. That's when the testing began. Subtle looks, a comment about rough edges, the way my father pronounced van like a problem parked too close to the lawn. Tonight their concerns arrive in a row, polished like cutlery. Mom, Margaret, says they only want what's best. Dad, Thomas, says control is safety, as if love is a loose wire near wet tiles. Then Mum mentions the deed to my late grandmother's flat, the one they promised to put in trust for me after years of claiming I'd never need to worry. She says, softly, that trust depends on judgment. I hear the beep of a monitor in my chest. I think of night shifts, of a quiet room where Jamie leaves soup by the sink, of Aunt Rosa telling me, don't mistake manners for love. I say I love him. Dad folds his napkin like an instruction manual. Decide by Sunday, Mum says, before people start asking questions. Their eyes shine with pity that feels like a polished shoe on my neck. The room grows cold, and Jamie's hand slips from my knee like a retreating tide. She smiles thinly and says, decide by Sunday, or lose everything. People think my parents are kind because they fund the church roof and donate a silent auction weekend at a tasteful cottage. They are kind the way a museum is warm in winter, safe to stand in, not made for living. Mum taught me cutlery before multiplication because manners open doors. Dad believed in optics like gospel. We were the family that never ran, never sweated, never said can't, only not advisable. When I said nursing, he said, if blood is your calling, fine. Just keep it discreet. As a child, I learned to disappear into other people's comfort. Report cards were framed only if the teacher also praised my posture. My earliest crushes were nice boys, until Mum found a reason their shoes or schools might embarrass the table. Then they vanished on their own, as if air kissed out of existence. The creed was simple. We know best because we want the best. From far away, it sounded like love. Up close, it was a velvet rope across my life. Jamie slipped past the rope because he didn't see it. He just held it up so an old man with a cane could pass. He laughed at rules that made dinners feel like auditions. He fixed Rosa's broken shelf, then stayed to hear about her late wife, and wiped the counter without being asked. He made my parents nervous with how easily he fit beside people they hire. Last week at Sunday lunch, Mum rested a fingertip on a bowl of olives and said, Jamie is charming in a salt-of-the-earth way. I only worry about the hospital gala. I said galas don't test courage or character. Dad folded his napkin twice. Places decide people, he said. Later, Jamie asked if he'd done something wrong, and I lied, because I still wanted peace to be possible. That night Rosa texted, they're choosing control and calling it care. Document every cut. Her warning pulsed like a monitor alarm I kept silencing in denial. The first odd call hits my ward on a Tuesday at 9:17. During meds. Is Nurse Alexandra Carter working today? A pleasant woman asks, then says she's an old family friend concerned about influences. My charge nurse frowns and shoos the phone back onto its cradle. At 1842, a neighbor messages our building's WhatsApp. Saw a man loitering by 2BS door. Be careful. It's Jamie, holding my spare key and a bag of groceries. I laugh it off publicly, but my cheeks burn. At 21:03, Mum sends a voice note. Someone mentioned Jamie's van was parked outside a gambling shop last week. Do you know about that? Her tone is syrup over gravel. Jamie says he was wiring sconces at a cafe next door. He shows me the invoice, date stamped and signed by a manager called Priya. I want that to be the end. On Thursday, a concerned friend emails my NHS account, an address never used for personal life, with a subject line, please read, safety. The body says, background check Jamie S. Public records available, followed by a link. IT flags it as phishing and blocks it. I start to doubt the universe instead of my parents, because doubting them still feels forbidden. On Saturday, a woman I barely know corners me outside the community hall and asks if I'm rushing things. Her breath smells like mint and gossip. That night Jamie cooks, but the onions sting more than usual. He says, "Do you want me to keep my distance?" I say no. I want my family to behave. He nods and kisses the top of my head like he's checking my temperature. At 23:11, Dad texts, "We can help you think clearly if you let us." The next morning, the building manager forwards a complaint about unregistered overnight guests, signed Anonymous, with a screenshot of our door camera. The picture is Jamie, carrying soup and lilies. I close my eyes, and the pattern clicks into place like a switch I can't unflip. What if someone close is feeding strangers permission to judge us? The family event is Aunt Rose's church fundraiser, the kind of evening where paper crowns sit beside cut crystal and everyone pretends raffle tickets are thrilling. Jamie arrives after a job, shirt clean but hands nicked from a stubborn junction box. He shakes Thomas's hand. Thomas holds it too long, smiling like a pastor at confession. "Let's have a word," he says, guiding me toward the vestry lined with hymnals and coffee urns. Margaret glides in behind us, perfume crisp as winter apples. "We've spoken to a solicitor," she begins mildly, "about the flat deed and how to best protect you." Thomas adds, "Housing is leverage for predators. We won't let you be targeted." I say, "Jamie isn't a predator," and my voice stays steady even as my stomach flips. Margaret folds her arms. "Then you won't mind signing a short-term separation, 30 days, purely to cool the noise." I laugh, a short ugly sound. "You're bargaining with a home that was promised to me." Thomas shrugs. "Promises are contingent on prudence." We return to the hall. Jamie asks, "Everything okay?" I nod because I want him to enjoy one evening with my family not as a suspect, but as my partner. During the auction, Margaret bids on a bronze heron and whispers, "We'll talk Sunday." My phone buzzes at 22:08. An anonymous email titled, "You Deserve the Truth." Inside is a grainy photo of Jamie outside a shop with barred windows, time-stamped last month, and a sentence, "He owes people. Ask him." Beneath the photo is an attachment that IT quarantines, public records _ Jimmy S. PDF. When we get home, Jamie shows me bank transfers, steady wage deposits, rent paid, no withdrawals over £200, no debts except his van. I believe him, but belief feels like a boat in choppy water. At 23:51 a.m., second email pings my personal account with the subject, "Final warning," and a line that makes my skin prickle. "Your inheritance shouldn't be squandered on a man like that." I stare at the sender name, concerned friend, and the email header that routes through a privacy service with a billing address in our suburb. I am still staring when my phone rings, and HR appears on the screen. Then my supervisor forwards me a recorded call from Margaret's phone. The recording is clipped, professional, ice cold. "I worry about Alexandra's boundaries," Margaret tells my supervisor, given her association with someone under scrutiny. HR calls it an informational courtesy, but the word defamation flashes in my brain like a faulty light. I tell Jamie. He sits at the edge of the sofa, palms open. "If staying away helps your career, I'll do it," he says, and the generosity of it punches the air from my lungs. "No," I say, and then quieter, "Not like this." I forward the voicemail to my personal email and save it in 3 places. Aunt Rosa arrives with plum cake and a look that says she sees everything. We play the message. She exhales through her nose. "They're throwing silk over a cage," she says. "Slow down, document, and don't get baited." Family chat becomes a stadium. Cousin Eloise posts a prayer request for hard choices. Uncle Peter writes about protecting the family name like he's opening a museum wing. Thomas messages me privately. "You're pushing us into legal options we don't want." I reply, "Stop contacting my job." He answers with a screenshot from a reputation services website offering relationship risk assessments. The invoice preview shows an amount, £1,200. My chest goes tight. Margaret invites me for tea without him, and when I decline, she types a single sentence, "You're choosing strangers over us." I look around my flat, plants drooping, mugs stacked, Jamie's boots by the door, and feel the risky joy of choosing my life. That night, a complaint hits our building again. 2 loud voices, possible domestic. The timestamp is 1912, when Jamie and I were silent, eating leftover noodles. The building manager apologizes, but says he must follow procedure. Someone is making a paper trail, Rosa says, tapping the notice. Jamie's face goes still. I won't let them cost you your home, he says. I say, they already think I'm a thing they own. The words taste like iron. At midnight, my phone lights with Thomas's final text of the night. We're suspending the trust disbursement, effective immediately, pending your decision. Then our landlord emails asking if partners are listed on my lease application. I ask the landlord for the complaint logs. He sends PDFs, 3 entries, all from Anonymous, all with the same clipped phrasing and odd capitalization. Subject observed lingering. The camera screenshots are clear and legal, but the person submitting them has access to footage tenants don't have. I check the building portal and see a new, authorized viewer was added to my unit on the 3rd, a generic email ending in Safe Consult. I didn't add it. I screenshot the audit trail and revoke access. At work, my supervisor forwards a second voicemail, this time from a blocked number that'll look up pegs as a spoofing service. The caller uses a softened voice, out of concern, asking whether the hospital screens partners for records. She names Jamie's full name and the street where he parks his van. The timestamp is 10:14. At 10:26 my mother texts me, had a difficult call on your behalf. Don't thank me. At 12:03, I open my postbox and find a folded receipt from Repute Check Limited for enhanced background bundle, charged to TM, with our home postcode. There's also a second, smaller receipt from a phone shop, prepaid SIM, no ID required. I take photos. My hands shake so hard the images blur. Jamie says, tell me everything. I do. He's quiet, then reaches for my laptop. Let's pull my file, he says. We request his credit report and public court listings. There's nothing alarming. One late payment from 2 years ago, since cleared. I print it and slide it into a folder labeled evidence in cheap black marker. Aunt Rosa phones a friend, Solicitor Hale, who agrees to advise off the record if I collect timestamps and caller IDs. Keep explanations simple, he says later over coffee. Defamation is saying false things that harm reputation. Harassment is repeated unwanted contact. He tells me to record calls where legal, to notify HR in writing, and to consider a non-molestation order if escalation continues. The words are heavy but understandable, like lifting a patient safely with 3 people instead of 1. That night, I log into our Wi-Fi router and see a device labeled visitor phone _2, connecting twice in the past week during hours when we weren't home. The MAC address points to a cheap handset. I swallow hard. They were outside, Jamie says, jaw tight. I think of the second SIM receipt, the anonymous emails, the Safe Consult access added without consent. My world narrows to a tunnel where alarms are beeping in order. Then I find a draft email in my mother's sent folder addressed to my HR director. The draft is visible because months ago I set up Mom's new phone and, by accident or fate, her mail account synced to my iPad under Family. I never used it, never looked, until tonight, when instinct guides my thumb. The draft is titled Safeguarding Concern, full of pleasant nouns like duty and safety, with a bullet list of incidents that reads like a novelist's outline. Raised voices, we were quiet. Suspicious vehicle, Jamie's registered van. A financial tie, my rent. A public altercation, non-existent. At the bottom, a line glows like a fuse. We hope to handle this privately to avoid reputational harm. The "we" is underlined by the cursor. I take screenshots of everything. Timestamps. IP addresses. The autosave history shows edits from 2 devices, Thomas's iPhone and Margaret's iPad. I email the images to myself, to Aunt Rosa, and to a cloud folder named Roof, because that's what this is becoming, a shelter against rain I didn't consent to. Rosa replies instantly. You have enough to stop pretending this is misunderstanding. I cross-checked the building camera complaints with the times Margaret's device was editing the draft. 1912 complaint, 1917 edit. 2144 complaint, 2150 edit. The pattern is so neat it almost feels kind. like they're trying to be caught. We visit Priya at the cafe. She prints the job sheet Jamie signed. The day and time his van was near the betting shop. The timestamp lands exactly when Mom's concerned friend email claimed he was loitering. We meet an ex-friend of mine, Hannah, who admits Margaret called her as a mother to ask about Jamie's temper. Hannah shows her call log. The number matches the prepaid SIM brand. "I'm sorry," she says, eyes damp. "It felt wrong as soon as I hung up." At home, Jamie flips through the folder. "They want me gone," he says. "Not just out of your life, out of the record." I think of Thomas's phrase, control equals protection. Protect whom? From what? I draft an email to HR. Please file the attached as a harassment report, attaching logs, audio, screenshots, and a timeline with simple explanations. I CC Hale and BCC myself. As I hit send, my phone lights again with a new message from Repute Check showing an updated partner risk dossier, paid at 1602. Then the dossier lists a source inside the hospital feeding them notes. Hale meets us at a quiet coffee shop that smells like cardamom and rain. I spread the folder, the safeguarding concern draft, complaint logs, the safe consult, access, Priya's invoice, Hannah's call record, and the new partner risk dossier. Hale reads without interrupting, pencil tapping the page margins like a metronome. "You've uncovered the what," he says finally, voice level. "Paid, reputation services, spoofed calls, background pulls, building surveillance manipulations, and targeted whispers to your workplace." He holds up the dossier's back page. This line, internal hospital source, is either fiction to scare you or someone they leaned on. My throat tightens. If HR is compromised, my job becomes a chessboard. Hale explains the stakes like bedside teaching. Defamation if it's false statements causing harm. Harassment for repeated unwanted contact. Unlawful data access for the building portal. Potential malicious communications. He underlines potential, a word that feels both thin and sharp. Then comes the twist I didn't expect. Hale points to a small paragraph in the service invoice. Scope includes contact with prior associates and immigration review where applicable. Immigration review. Jamie's mother was born in Dublin. He has dual citizenship, but last year he renewed his UK passport late after misplacing the reminder letter. The reputation firm lists visa/clearance verification, and my stomach dips. They are signaling pressure points, Hale says. Even if nothing is wrong, the shadow is the weapon. He asks about my lease. I tell him the landlord's email. He nods. Housing is another pressure point. He asks about the family trust. I tell him they've suspended disbursement. He taps again. Money, housing, job, status. They're pulling every thread to isolate you, and by extension, him. Rosa leans forward. Why? Hale shrugs. Control often pretends to be protection. Sometimes it hides debt, a scandal, or plain prejudice. He advises 2 tracks. Evidence preservation and controlled disclosure. You don't owe them private confrontation now, he says. You owe yourselves a paper trail and a witness. I glance at Jamie. He squeezes my hand once, like he's restarting my heart with permission. Hale's last instruction is practical, almost kind. Breathe, eat, sleep. You cannot hold a line if you collapse. I promise to try. We stand to leave, and my phone vibrates. HR again. With an invitation I didn't request. Informal meeting with senior leadership to discuss concerns, scheduled for Monday at 9 o'clock. The organizer line lists a name I recognize from Mum's Bridge Club. Someone inside my hospital is now officially answering my parents' invitations. Sunday becomes lists and labels. I separate everything into 3 envelopes. Work, home, family. Work holds HR emails, call recordings, the internal source, line, and a concise timeline with caller IDs and dates. Home contains the landlord thread, portal audit screenshots, and complaint PDFs. Family carries the draft to HR from Mum's devices, the reputation services invoice, Hannah's call log, Priya's timestamp, and Thomas's texts about legal options. I print duplicates and upload scans to Roof, then share read-only links with Rosa and Hale. Jamie pulls the kettle on and off like a heartbeat, then opens a fresh notebook. We need boundaries we can enforce, he says. We write them out like rules posted above a triage bay. No direct calls. All communication in writing. No discussion at my workplace. No unsolicited access to our building systems. No contact with my employer or landlord. Any future contact to go through Hale. Hale drafts notices. A polite but firm email to HR requesting that the 9 o'clock informal meeting include a union rep and that any allegations be provided in writing 48 hours in advance. A letter to the landlord stating that third-party surveillance of my unit is unlawful and access has been revoked. A pre-action letter to my parents demanding they cease contact with my employer and landlord. Preserve all records and confirm in writing by Tuesday at 1700 hours. He adds a cooling-off clause. If they comply, we'll meet with a neutral mediator to rebuild trust under clear terms. It's not theater, it's cover. So if they balk, the record shows we offered a path that isn't scorched earth. I wrestle with the moral question that kept me up all night. Confront them privately before formal letters hit, or let the paper speak first. Rosa answers for me. Eyes kind but unyielding. Private talks are where they practice their power, she says. Paper is where you practice yours. Jamie nods. We go first with paper. I exhale like I'm stepping back from a bed after a code and hearing the faintest return of rhythm. I send the HR email. Hale files the landlord letter. Then I BCC myself and send the pre-action letter to Margaret and Thomas. 10 minutes later, read, pings beneath both names. 10 more, and my door buzzer shrieks like an alarm. My parents are downstairs, demanding 5 minutes before lawyers poison everything. Margaret's coat swings like a metronome as she enters. Thomas's smile looks sutured in place. Rosa sits on the arm of my sofa, not blocking, simply witnessing. Jamie remains in the kitchen, within earshot. You didn't have to escalate, Margaret says, voice low and textured with disappointment, as if I've scuffed borrowed shoes. You contacted my job, I reply. Twice. Thomas lifts his palms. We contacted them to verify support systems, he says, because we heard yelling at your door and saw a rough element. Rosa laughs once sharp. Your complaints were time-stamped when the flat was quiet enough to hear the throttle of the fridge. Margaret's eyes flick. We acted from love, she says. I recognize the script. I used to think it was a him. Thomas leans forward. You're putting your inheritance at risk for a man with a van. Jamie appears then, gently placing tea on the table. And hands, he says. Hands that earn honestly. Margaret's gaze schemes his knuckles, the tiny cuts, then returns to me. Do you want children, Alex? She asks softly. Stability? My chest tightens. I want respect, I say, and no more lies. I slide the printed draft of her HR email across the table. This is yours. She doesn't touch it. Thomas says, we will not be interrogated in our daughter's sitting room. Rosa's voice slices the air. Then you will be questioned in a solicitor's, she says. For a moment, the room fills with the scent of oversteeped tea and something older, my childhood fear of being impolite. Thomas plays his truest card. We will put the flat in Eloise's name, he says, unless you declare, here and now, a 30-day separation from Jamie. Margaret's mouth tightens, which is to say she agrees. My body tilts toward giving in, toward peace, toward the familiar relief of obeying. Rosa sees it and says a single question that lances the spell. What would you tell a patient whose abuser offers them a house? My training returns like muscle memory. I straighten. The answer is no, I say. All further contact in writing. Thomas stands, offended on a cellular level. You will regret this, he says. Jamie's hand finds mine under the table, steady as a pulse. When they leave, my phone pings with a calendar invite from HR marked mandatory. Hale calls it not a trap, but a structured disclosure with neutral oversight. Still, it feels like a mousetrap I bait with facts. We move the HR meeting to a conference room and invite a union rep. We also request that any external concerned parties be excluded and that a written agenda be provided in advance. To my surprise, HR agrees. Agenda Item 3 references third-party information alleging risk. Hale asks that such information be presented in full for my review. In parallel, he schedules a mediation for Tuesday with a respected community mediator. Neutral room, witness present, ground rules recorded. Invitations go out to Margaret and Thomas with one addition. Alex will present documented evidence of false statements and interference. He copies Eloise, the cousin who's been wobbling in the family chat. A wavering witness often becomes an honest one when the lights are on. Hale murmurs. We prepare exhibits like a courtroom. A timeline of calls and emails. B. Building portal audit. C. Complaint PDFs. D. Mum's draft to HR showing device history. E. Reputation services invoice and scope. F. Priya's job sheet. G. Hannah's call log and note. H. Thomas's text threatening the trust. I. HR invite showing organizer with bridge club tie. J. Landlord thread. K. My union rep's note. We put them in order inside a slim binder. Jamie adds a simple cover sheet. Alex Carter, record of unwanted interference. I add one page titled, What I Want. Bulleting requests in simple language. Cease contact with employer and landlord. Written apology to be placed on record at HR. Stop payments to reputation services. Agree to mediated boundaries. Confirm trust decisions won't be used as coercion. The clarity calms me like lines on a monitor. At 8:50 Monday, I walk into HR with Rosa and my union rep. The senior manager greets me with a controlled smile. Beside her sits a risk officer I don't know. On the table is a folder embossed with the hospital crest. We've received concerning information. The manager begins, and we'd like your response. I nod. I'll respond after I see what you've received, I say, sliding my binder forward. She opens her folder, and my breath catches. The evidence inside is a printed, watermarked packet titled Relationship Risk Assessment, complete with the same logo as the reputation firm invoice. The internal source section includes a paragraph with staff-only details about my rota that could only come from someone with access. The risk officer clears his throat and says my mother's name appears in their email chain. The room holds its breath. The risk officer taps a page. We received this packet from an outside firm, he says carefully, with an email thread that includes your mother, your father, and one of our volunteer coordinators. My union rep leans forward. Volunteer, not staff? The officer nods, embarrassed. A well-liked donor connected them. My spine chills. Bridge Club meets hospital gala. I point to the rota paragraph. That's staff only, I say. The manager winces. It was shared improperly by the volunteer. We are investigating. Hale, on speaker, says, please note the term defamation and harassment in your notes. The manager nods quickly. We're very sorry for the distress, she says, the bureaucratic form of a flinch. I open my binder and begin. Exhibit A, the timeline. Exhibit D, the draft email from Margaret's devices. Exhibit E, the invoice showing scope and payment. I keep my words short, my tone even, as if reading vitals aloud. Rosa watches the manager's face soften from defense into something like shame. When I finish, the risk officer closes his folder. We will disregard the packet, he says. We'll also issue a formal apology and place a note in your file that the materials were unsolicited and unreliable. He looks relieved to do the right thing in daylight. Outside, I breathe cold air until my lungs accept it. Hale texts, well done. Now the mediator. Tuesday's room is bright and plain. Chairs in a circle, water in sweating pitchers. The mediator opens with ground rules. Margaret and Thomas enter in a practiced silhouette of concern. Eloise slips in last, cheeks pink. We're here to heal, Margaret announces, already arranging the narrative. I ask the mediator to share a screen. Up goes the binder as a slide deck. Headers large, dates clear. These are receipts, I say, and show them all. When I reach the device history on Mum's draft to HR, Eloise's eyes widen. Auntie, she whispers. Margaret blinks, then tries the script. We were frightened, she says. We heard yelling. Rosa speaks from her chair, quiet and brutal. You wrote the yelling into a draft before it existed. Thomas huffs, then pivots to scorn. This is a shakedown for apology, he says. Hale's voice from the speaker is calm. It's a request for truth and boundaries. The mediator asks the question that breaks the performance. What outcome do you want, Alex? I read my bullet list. Silence follows like snow. Then the mediator turns to my parents. Will you agree? Margaret's jaw works. Thomas stares at the table. Finally, he says, we will not apologize for protecting our child. I nod once and slide the final page face up. Then this recording goes to the hospital, the landlord, and our solicitor tomorrow. By Wednesday, Consequences arrive in plain envelopes and clipped emails. HR sends a formal apology signed by the senior manager and risk officer, confirming the relationship risk assessment is withdrawn. The volunteer coordinator is suspended pending investigation, and my record notes, no concerns. The relief is functional, like good compression on a failing airway. Necessary, not joyous. The landlord replies to Hale's letter, retracts the partner inquiry, and disables all third-party access to my unit's portal. He includes a warning that any further surveillance requests must go through legal. Then the family chat combusts. Eloise posts 3 eyes-wide emojis. Then, they showed proof. Margaret responds with a paragraph about dignity. Thomas follows with, families protect their own, which is either a confession or a threat depending on the angle you hold it. Rosa writes one sentence. Protection without consent is control. Jamie finds his van keyed along the passenger side, a long sneer of metal. We file a police report. The officer nods at our folder and says, keep documenting. My body keeps a ledger too. Shallow sleep, jaw aches, one migraine that feels like a fire alarm wedged behind my eye. At work, a patient's wife squeezes my hand and says, don't let the fancy ones tell you love must be starched. I almost cry into her tea. Nights, Jamie and I rearrange the flat to feel safer. Router password changed, cameras pointed inward, a privacy film on the window, so the hall becomes a blur. I start therapy with an NHS counselor who says my parents taught me to trade compliance for conditional warmth, then calls the swap by its name, coercive control. The words scrape and then soothe. Thomas emails Hale a counteroffer. They will stop contacting my employer if I reconsider public statements and delay cohabitation. I write back. We already cohabit. The public statements are your emails and invoices. Margaret sends a longer message, softer, like a dressing over a bruise. She says she was misled by professionals and only wanted to test Jamie's intentions. Rosa forwards me a photo from years ago, me in school uniform, shoulders up, Margaret's hand on my neck like a pearl necklace. I save it beside the receipts, proof of a longer pattern. On Friday, payday, the trust account that should receive a small quarterly disbursement shows hold. It stings less than I expect. I've already stopped counting invisible money. But grief arrives sideways. An old song on the radio, Margaret's recipe box still in my cupboard, the remembered thrill of her rare praise. Jamie holds me while I shake it out like a fever. We eat toast for dinner and talk about paint for the living room because small futures feel possible again. The next morning the post slot clacks and something slides onto the mat with the weight of a stepping stone. The envelope smells faintly of her perfume, crisp as winter apples. Then an envelope arrives addressed to me in Margaret's handwriting. Inside the envelope is an apology that isn't one. I'm sorry you felt cornered, sits on cream paper between references to appearances and timing, with a handwritten PS. 30 days apart would calm everything. Rosa reads it, snorts softly, and circles the loopholes in red. Hale drafts a reply that uses the plainest words in English: cease, desist, apologize, confirm. He adds a proposal. Mediated contact only, monthly check-ins for 6 months, no discussion of my job, housing, or relationship. Breach equals no contact for 90 days. He also attaches a drafted non-molestation order, and signed, to remind everyone the law has a spine. Jamie and I build routines that feel like placing sandbags. Sunday therapy homework in the park. Midweek dinner with Rosa and her neighbor who tells stories about her late wife that turn grief into a kind of lantern. A shared inbox for all family communication so it doesn't leak into work. A boundary script we practice like CPR, short, repeatable, not open to negotiation. When I falter, Jamie says, back to the script, and I breathe again. We sign a new lease together. My landlord, suddenly punctilious, smiles a little too fast and hands us 2 sets of keys. We change the locks, register for mail redirection, and buy a small safe that clicks shut with a sound I've wanted since childhood. At the hospital, I ask HR to run an all-volunteer reminder on confidentiality. The manager apologizes again in person, eyes sincere, and promises retraining. She even asks if I want my name on the new policy draft. It feels like turning a bruise into a shield. I accept. Jamie takes a first aid refresher. I learn how his van hums when it's happiest. On my mother's birthday, I send a card that says, "I hope you're well. Our boundaries remain. We're open to mediated contact." She replies with a photo of a cake and nothing else. It doesn't gut me like it would have 2 months ago. Healing isn't a sunrise. It's a dimmer switch we keep inching toward enough. On Saturday evening, we paint the wall a color called Harbor, and the room exhales. I stand back with a roller dripping onto newspaper and realize love can be orderly without being controlled. My phone buzzes. Margaret again, this time a short, trembling voice note. On Sunday, Margaret asks to meet alone, promising finally to listen. I meet her in a public garden on a gray afternoon where geese hiss at bread and children conquer the slide like a mountain. She sits, mittened, smaller than her voice. "I made a mess," she says. I wait. "I thought control meant care," she says finally, a confession like a cough. "Your father told me the firm only verifies," and then it grew. I think of credit lines set to auto-increase. "It grew because you watered it with fear," I say, and her eyes flash, then dim. She asks about boundaries. I hand her a printed page that begins, "Here are our conditions for safe contact," and ends with, "Please sign and return." She reads every line. "I can agree," she says, "but your father—" I stop her gently. "You, not him." She nods once, the smallest bow to adulthood. We part without hugging. Back home, I write the ending I wish someone had handed me at 19. You can love people and refuse their control. Love without autonomy is performance. Evidence matters. Keep receipts. If your job is threatened by whispers, insist on writing and witnesses. Learn the plain words for complicated harms. Defamation is false statements that damage reputation. Harassment is repeated, unwanted contact. A non-molestation order is a court paper that tells someone to stop. If money is used to force choices, name it as coercion even when the envelope is heavy and smells like winter apples. Build allies who remember who you were before the story got expensive. Write a boundary script with your partner. Tape it inside a cupboard door. Peace that costs your voice is not peace. It is a museum where you are the exhibit. We make tea. Jamie paints a careful line along the ceiling, shoulder steady. The geese honk somewhere in the city like old horns. My phone chimes. An email from HR with the final policy draft. My name is on the acknowledgments beneath, staff advocate. Another chime. Hale confirming Margaret signed the mediation terms and sent a 2-sentence apology we can actually keep. I set the paper in the safe and close it with that satisfying click. Outside, the street lamp flickers on. Inside, our wall dries to the color of tidewater at dusk. I take a photo for Rosa and write, "We're okay. Not perfect, but okay." She replies with a heart and a saucepan emoji, which means soup. Jamie laughs when he sees it, and I lean my head on his shoulder as the paint cures, slow and sure. Our future starts quiet, and quiet is finally enough for me.